The story began at Camp Manab. The camp was run by owner Frank Kostic and his head counselor Ronnie Angelo, who tried to keep everyone in line. There was a boy named Alan. He was a socially awkward and immature teenage boy with a messy appearance. Alan was often picked on by other campers, so sometimes he lashed out by bullying younger kids, like one nicknamed PP, just to feel tough. Unfortunately for Alan, many campers made him the target of their bullying, including his own stepbrother Michael, and Michael's friends TC and Vinny, as well as a girl named Bella. One night, Alan tried to join a prank, where a group of boys were literally trying to set their farts on fire for laughs. Alan failed to make a flame and got angry, threatening the other boys, until a counselor named Randy stepped in and stopped the mischief. The next day at lunch in the dining hall, Alan complained about the food and caused a scene. Randy reacted by shoving Alan roughly, even pushing his face into a plate, until Ronnie stepped in to break it up. Ronnie calmed the situation by letting Alan get something else to eat instead of the cafeteria meal. Alan went into the kitchen for a snack but clashed with the camp's cook Mickey. Mickey caught Alan taking an ice cream sandwich without permission and exploded with anger. He yelled at Alan and even threw eggs at him, while Alan grabbed a pan in frustration. In the chaos, Alan hurled a butcher knife at Mickey. It narrowly missed him and stuck into the doorframe. At that moment, camp owner Frank stormed in, furious at Alan's behavior. Overwhelmed and enraged, Alan screamed, "I hope you all die!" and ran out of the mess hall into the woods. Frank then told Michael to go after his stepbrother, so Michael chased Alan into the dark woods to calm him down and bring him back. Michael finally caught up with Alan at a clearing where Alan kept a bunch of frogs as his friends. Michael grew annoyed and tried to drag Alan back to camp. At one point, he cruelly kicked one of Alan's beloved frogs away, which sent Alan into a rage. Alan grabbed Michael's fallen pocket knife and pointed it at him threateningly. Michael wrestled the knife back, yelled at Alan, and stormed back to camp alone. That same night, Mickey stayed behind in the kitchen to clean up. Suddenly, an unseen killer attacked him. The assailant lifted Mickey into the air and plunged his head into a large deep fryer filled with boiling oil. Mickey was horribly burned and killed as his face was fried. Afterward, the killer wrapped his body in garbage bags and dumped the corpse into the camp's trash compactor. Not long after, the camp held a social night. Alan saw Weed and Stan secretly smoking marijuana. They got excited when they spotted him and invited him to join them. Curious, Alan asked them to give him one too. Alan inhaled but immediately choked and coughed so hard that he stumbled forward and landed face first in Stan's lap. It turned out they had given Alan dried cow manure instead. All the kids burst into laughter. Later that night, after the social, the prankster Weed met his gruesome fate. The unseen killer grabbed Weed, tied him to a chair, and pumped gasoline down his throat with a tube. The killer slapped a sticker over Weed's mouth that read, "Drugs are for dummies," and shoved a lit cigarette through it. The gasoline ignited, and Weed's insides exploded from the fire, killing him horribly. When news of this death and Mickey's earlier disappearance spread, Ronnie grew paranoid. He started to suspect that a murderer was stalking the camp, just like the killings 20 years ago at Camp Arawak. Frank, however, refused to admit anything was wrong. He insisted these were only accidents and tried to keep everyone calm. Karen was a pretty popular girl whom Alan had a crush on. One day, Alan tried to convince her to hang out at his secret spot in the woods. She hesitated, but Alan kept asking until she finally agreed, bringing her friend Marie along. At Alan's hideout, he proudly showed them his frogs and offered them soda, but the outing went horribly wrong when Marie stumbled upon a frog that had been skinned alive, its bloody remains lying nearby. The girls were horrified and immediately assumed Alan had killed it. They screamed, called Alan a freak, and ran away in terror. Alan, shocked, chased after Karen, trying to explain that he didn't do it. Before Alan could catch up, TC stepped in and attacked him. TC grabbed Alan and gave him a vicious wedgie, tearing off his underwear, then threw him into the lake. Karen and Marie watched the bullying from the shore. Alan was left floundering half-naked in the water, humiliated once again. That same night, the bullies decided to take things even further. Michael, TC, and even Marie planned one final extreme prank to utterly humiliate Alan at the camp's social gathering. They pressured Karen to lure Alan backstage at the rec hall. Karen, guilty but too afraid to defy them, reluctantly agreed and told Alan to meet her behind the stage for a made-up reason. When Alan showed up backstage expecting Karen, he was ambushed by Michael and his friends. They grabbed him, stripped him down to his underwear, and tied him up, even blindfolding him. Then, in front of the entire camp, they shoved the bound and half-naked Alan onto the stage. Karen watched from the side, her face full of regret, realizing the prank had gone way too far. At that moment, Counselor Petey intervened. Petey rushed on stage, untied Alan, covered him up, and furiously scolded the campers for their cruelty. Alan was distraught, either in tears or enraged, and he bolted into the darkness after being freed. Seeing this, Ronnie noticed how protective Petey always was toward Alan. Since Petey constantly defended Alan and clashed with the bullies, Ronnie even began to suspect Petey might be behind the murders, acting as a vigilante against Alan's tormentors. Later that night, the killer's rampage truly began. Camp owner Frank returned to his cabin after the commotion, only to be attacked by the unseen killer lurking inside. Frank was knocked out with a hammer. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in a grotesque trap. His head had been shoved into a birdcage, and he was restrained, unable to move. The killer approached and cruelly placed 2 live rats into the cage with Frank's head. This torturous attack killed Frank in gruesome fashion. Elsewhere in camp, Counselor Randy and his girlfriend Linda slipped away to the old pump house for some private time. Inside a Jeep, the couple grew intimate. Randy stepped outside to relieve himself against a tree, and at that moment the killer struck. The killer looped a thin, strong fishing line around Randy's and tied the other end to the Jeep without him realizing it. Moments later, Linda heard Randy crying out in pain and begging someone to stop, which terrified her. Panicking and not knowing what was happening, Linda started the Jeep and sped away. The result was catastrophic. The fishing line snapped taut and violently ripped off Randy's. The Jeep tore forward. Meanwhile, Linda's escape didn't last long. The killer had stretched a line of barbed wire across the road, and Linda drove straight into it. The impact and the brutal injuries killed her instantly. At the same time, another camper named Spaz stopped by TC's cabin to chat. TC heard a strange noise under the floorboards. He crouched down and peered through a hole to investigate. In that instant, the killer rammed a sharpened wooden spear upward through the hole, straight into TC's eye. The spear drove deep into his head, killing him painfully on the spot. Shortly after, Ronnie and another counselor named Jenny stumbled upon the horrifying sight of Frank's corpse in his cabin. Terrified, they rushed to gather all the campers into one place for safety. In the chaos, Bella, the girl who had bullied Alan earlier, became separated from the group and went back to her cabin alone. As soon as she lay down on her bed, she discovered that the mattress of the upper bunk had been replaced with a wooden board studded with long, sharp spikes. The bodies of TC and Bella were soon discovered, sending the camp into even greater panic. Sheriff Jerry, the local policeman with the harsh mechanical voice, got involved in the investigation and tried to keep order. Karen, racked with fear and guilt, became convinced that Alan was behind the murders and worried that she might be the next victim. She ran frantically through the dark campgrounds. In her desperate flight, Karen stumbled upon the bodies of Randy and Linda near the pump house. The gruesome discovery overwhelmed her with shock. Then, the killer suddenly appeared right in front of her. Karen screamed and fainted on the spot. A short while later, Karen regained consciousness and found herself standing on a chair with a noose around her neck. The rope was tied to the raised basketball hoop in the recreation hall. The killer stood nearby and flipped a switch, causing the hoop to rise. Just then, Michael burst into the rec hall and saw Karen in danger. The killer slipped away into the shadows the moment Michael arrived. Michael rushed to shut off the machine and lowered the hoop, saving Karen's life at the last second. Furious, Michael became convinced that Alan truly was the killer. He grabbed a croquet mallet as a weapon. Michael went straight to Alan's favorite hiding spot in the woods. There, he found Alan cowering among his frogs. Without hesitation, Michael attacked, savagely beating Alan with the croquet mallet. Alan was left bloodied and battered on the ground as Michael's rage kept building. At that moment, the real killer emerged from the shadows right behind Michael. A short while later, Ronnie, Ricky, and Jenny arrived at the scene. They found Alan badly injured but still alive. Then Sheriff Jerry appeared, approaching the group. Speaking in that familiar mechanical voice, the sheriff began to monologue. Kids at this camp never learned. They bullied and hurt others and thought they'd get away with it, but now they had gotten what they deserved. As the sheriff spoke, Ronnie suddenly realized who they were really dealing with. The sheriff peeled off his fake face, wig, and disguise, revealing that he was actually Angela Baker. Angela stood proudly in her police uniform, no longer hiding, wearing a wild grin. Then Jenny noticed something on the ground nearby and recoiled in horror. To their shock, they discovered Michael's body lying there. He had been completely skinned from head to toe.